The recent Online Criminal Harms Act.
This is really shady. There is some criminal activity going on here.
She found like AI generated nude photos of herself online.
Are we allowed to do that as a country?
A person who feels violated, you may never really recover from it. Children have died. Is that the kind of content that we want our children to be exposed to?
Oh my god, you're gonna ban TikTok?
Are your nudes also online? Then
How you know?
this is your daily Ketchup. Then you know what's criminal and online?
Me?
People that are watching our videos that are not yet subscribed. Is that you?
Yeah.
You are part of the more than 50% that are not yet subscribed. So please take some time to scroll down below, click the subscribe, turn on the notification bell, jingle it real good, and we go on to the episode. Hello everybody, welcome to today's show, except to men who are afraid of powerful women. Because we have a strong independent one in the house today. Welcome Minister Josephine Teo.
Let's go.
What an intro, what an intro.
We are on her turf, we just realized that we are in her GRC.
Of course.
You see her
It's a
poster
very
downstairs?
friendly ground.
So the protection fees that we pay go, okay, not the time and place for that. We're a bit late this month, cash flow a bit. But, okay.
So we have Min here today to actually talk about something very serious, but of course we have to first take the opportunity to find out some behind the scenes stuff as we usually do.
No. Jalat,
No, but
jalat.
we start light. So based on your live records, right, on the interwebs, I realized that you study arts just like me. How has that turned out for you so far?
Actually very good, what?
You're very good. Why you study arts?
Well, I was in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. I
Okay.
liked it.
So
Yeah.
like the course name is what?
So I studied economics, and in those days
What,
you get to pick two. You get to pick two majors, so
Majors,
econs
okay,
and
okay.
stats.
How
Then I
does
studied
other
arts.
arts?
That's not very.
Yes,
That's
this
not
is
very-
the
so what did you-
Faculty
Yeah.
of
That was about
Arts
the art
and
course you took.
Social Sciences. These are the humanities.
Yeah, it is humanity.
Yeah, correct.
I cannot do the real arts.
No, but also at one point of time, everything that wasn't science was considered arts.
So when we spoke to Minister Chan Chun Sing, right, he mentioned that actually his childhood dream was to be a librarian.
Dang,
And
that was my childhood dream.
What, really?
Yeah. And actually, I think primary 3, I got my first job as a librarian. Okay, it was serious.
First job,
yeah.
yeah.
Like in school
seriously,
lah.
in school, of course.
Right.
But why was that your dream? Is it also like the aircon?
No, actually, in class at that time, there was no aircon. I was just in charge of these books. And then I felt a real sense of responsibility because when the books were delivered to the school, you know, I had to properly label them and then stack them nicely on the shelf so that
Okay, quite
very
therapeutic.
good, very good
Kidding,
thing
kidding,
to do.
kidding.
It's a contribution to society, contribution to community.
There needs to be order
Yeah,
in the
that's
world.
right.
I'm gonna ask this in the most respectful way, okay?
Yes.
Oh.
Your time got PSLE or not?
Of course.
What was your PSLE score?
I can't remember, but I know that as a result of my PSLE, I could go and study in what was known as Special Assistance Plan School.
Oh, SAP, SAP school.
SAP. So
Right.
you have to do first language for both English
Right.
and your mother tongue, which in Chinese lah.
Yep.
So I did both English and Chinese at first language level.
Wow.
So at
I
that
didn't know there
time,
was a difference.
at that time, when you studied history, I studied it in Chinese language.
Oh, I see. Then you gotta do it twice.
my-
No lah. You study it in
okay.
Chinese language, you don't have to do it twice.
Right.
That's
But
crazy.
it was. Well, to me, it was crazy hard.
But speaking
It
of
was.
your secondary school and a video that went, I think, quite viral, you recently went back to play basketball.
Oh man, yeah, that was a jalat.
Hey, why?
Hey, quite okay, what?
No, jalat in the sense that very chuan eh. I'm so
But you were on the school team last
practice.
time.
Yeah, in those days I was school
Back
team.
then lah,
Quite
back
modest
then
one
lah.
It's not.
Turn off the
It's
scope
not
lah.
like. It's not like very serious competition.
So
it's, we enjoy
recently,
ourselves.
DPM Lawrence Wong also play basketball and went viral. You think you can 1v1 him?
Well,
He also seemed
let
not-
me say
not
that
in the-
Lawrence should just
Out of
be
practice.
careful.
Watch out, 1v1.
No,
When he comes on the show, I'm gonna stand that you look fitter than him. A lot fitter.
Celebrity
I'm sure he's very
basketball
good too.
match.
I'm sure.
So we just had a lot of fun. Yeah,
Right.
we were my classmates and I. Sometimes when we get together, we still reminisce about those basketball days. We were not very studious. We were, recess comes, ping, we are on the court and then we are...
But can still do history in Chinese. Or...
Yeah, it's one of those never...
You need to expend all the energy in order to be able to contemplate.
You need to
history in
achieve that
Chinese language.
nirvana mind.
Something like that.
wow.
So then in the end, how did you end up in politics?
It's a really good question. It's a long way off from secondary school days though.
We fast forward.
I think you all should know this by now, right?
Yes,
we get invited to tea
Uh-huh.
and then after each tea, I said, can I not go for the next tea? Because there needs... there will be no conclusion,
Also,
that you're
also
hoping
you were
for.
CEO of
Business
PSA.
China?
Oh, Business China,
Business
right.
China. PSA was graceful. People constantly confuse the two of us.
I don't. It's just
Really,
I have
John?
a terrible memory.
Really?
Yes. I've met the both of y'all and I really like the both of y'all.
Thank you.
Let's move on.
Based on your expectation or what you had in mind of like the workload of the job or what you're actually taking on, right? That versus the reality of it after you step into politics. Was it
Wow.
a vast difference?
Jalat. I already imagined a step up. I didn't know what a big step up it
Yeah,
was.
It's a jump.
And I mean your political career was you take a few high profile, actually nothing wrong that you did, but I think some stuff that you blurted out that polarizing lah. And how
More
did you
interesting than they should have been.
no, I agree. And how did you like feel about the job during those times?
You
Were
gotta
you okay?
reflect on
Would you
it.
like, I expected this, I am in the public eye, or was it like a...
You know when it happens to other celebrities and so on, you kind of look at it and say, yeah lah, this is par for the course.
Yeah.
In public life it's like that. Then when it happens to people you know around you feel very bad for them.
Yeah.
Then when it happens to you, that's a whole new experience. It's like, how did I end up here?
Right.
That sort of thing. Then okay lah, then you learn, reflect. Can I do better the next time? Yeah.
So after you joined politics, right, was there like maybe like a first culture shock that you had that like you didn't expect came with the job?
Of course, because the whole way of working and how you are effective in public life, particularly with the grassroots,
Yep.
it's a completely different ballgame. In an organization, you have contracts, you have a professional relationship, you have committees. I mean, in the grassroots, there's also lots of committees.
Correct, not?
No.
When you work with entities, when you work with people, you can be right, but
There's a right and the right.
yeah.
And it's
yeah.
nobody
Put it that
angry at you in your face lah previously, is it?
No, I wouldn't say so. I would just say that to be effective in the grassroots, it's a lot more relationship based. You have to invest the time to get to know a person really deeply.
Right.
And you have to find a connection with them.
It's a more emotional conversation.
Yes. What motivates you, to want to put in, extra effort as a grassroots volunteer?
Yeah.
It's very relationship based. It's about the friends that you feel an obligation to. It's about the sense of ownership towards your community.
So in all your time in government so far, right? I mean, you've been in quite a few different ministries, finance, transport, even PMO, manpower, foreign affairs, and many more that I can read off.
been a while.
What's maybe something that you've worked on that people might not have known?
The one that I'm actually quite emotionally attached to is actually the development of Changi T5.
Oh, Jewel.
Yeah.
Is that
and
Jewel?
Jewel before that, right? We now have Jewel, but
Right.
T5 is still a way bit
Yeah.
off.
Oh.
So when I was in a Ministry of Transport, I was looking after maritime and I was looking after aviation.
Damn.
We had this effort, we had a big committee lah,
Yeah.
and then, we were thinking about, hey, should we make Changi, even greater than it already is? And in what direction do you take it? So we came up with a plan and it involved the development of T5. Yeah.
It's gigantic.
It's not going to be ready, for I think another 10 years at least.
Oh
Wow.
gosh.
Okay.
So you won't get to see it. But I think Jewel gives...
We will lah. We still young lah.
You won't get to see it yet. I think Jewel gives you a glimpse,
Jewel's
of the
only
kind
a
of standard.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And by the
That's
way,
so unnecessary, is it
I was
not?
also involved in a very serious set of conversations around Jewel because at one stage it nearly did not proceed. Nearly.
Spill the tea.
Now, when you think back, you say, how can?
It's a good idea.
how we
yeah.
live without it.
How can? Yeah.
So speaking of some of the things you've been working on,
That showed a Bible alongside the Quran and says, if you run out of toilet paper, ...
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Stop right there, especially if you're thinking of committing a criminal act online. Like, share, and subscribe, and don't commit criminal acts, okay? Back to the episode. I mean, obviously, we have you here for a reason, right? And that's to talk about the passing of the recent Online Criminal Harms Act. So this act essentially allows the government to tell individuals, entities, online and internet service providers, and even app stores to remove or block access to content that it suspects as being used to commit crimes, and maybe how it differs from POFMA, because that's something that people confuse it with.
Everyone who spends some time online knows that there will be content that you come across that is unsavory. You kind of feel like, oh, this is not so good, right? Yeah. But sometimes it crosses the line. Sometimes it is downright untruthful. It's a falsehood. And sometimes it goes even further than that. Like even you would be able to recognize this and say, you know, I think this is really shady, and there is some sort of a, you know, criminal activity going on here. You have experienced that. Yeah. I don't think that, you know, there's anyone who has gone online for a reasonable period of time that have not encountered these kinds of things.
You're
personally.
talking about, like, for example, money lending.
Yes, there could be that. It could be illegal money lending. It could be part of a scam. You look at it and you already say, this is too good to be true.
You straight away teach your mom like this kind of stuff cannot click like these are scams.
There was also recently, like, I think a TikTok that went viral because there was a girl, like, because she was crying, and then she was sharing how she found like AI generated nude photos of herself online, and then there was pretty much nothing she could do about it except beg people, please, like, don't share it if you come across it. So I think like things like that also will be included.
Yes, I think this lady, if I'm not wrong, who you're referring to is, I think she's Asian American.
Yes.
Yeah. But in any case, if something like that were to happen in Singapore, firstly, if you distribute illegitimate images, intimate images, you know, or recordings, it's in the first place illegal.
Yeah.
Whether, you know, those images or recordings are genuine or they are made to look real. It's firstly illegal. So with the Online Criminal Harms Act, what we'd want to be able to do is to investigate it first. And if you are able to establish which account it is, then you can issue a direction for this content to be removed, or at least disabled from view for users in Singapore.
But
that's a more technical language.
But the direction is made to the service provider, so like the website owner?
It can
or
be the communicator.
Okay.
I think Daniel, where you're coming from is that what if you can't reach the communicator? What if it's an avatar account? There's actually no one behind it. That's where being able to issue a direction to the social media platform that is hosting the content.
Wait, are you not able to do that like now?
Well, there is a difference. It may not even be a social media service. It may be beyond that. So the
Such
difference
as
between yes,
Could be a reselling platform.
it could
or
be.
scam,
That's right. So the new law that was passed allows us to act against all of these communication services, whichever may be exploited for such purposes. So that's one thing that we can do, get the platform to remove the content.
So current powers don't allow us to do that on messaging platforms?
It depends. And the law is calibrated. So last year, when we passed the Online Safety Bill in Parliament and made amendments to the Broadcasting Act, for example, content that may not cross the legal threshold, but they are nonetheless harmful, stuff that are encouraging people to try out self-harm.
Right.
Do you really want that?
Right.
So what about content that, you know, a little bit sensitive on racial harmony and religious intolerance? Guys, do you remember during COVID, there was this very offensive piece of content that showed a Bible alongside the Quran and says, if you run out of toilet paper, ...
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So when you come across content like that, as a society, we would feel very uncomfortable if it was allowed to continue, right? So we'd find a way, you know, that allows for this kind of content. If you want to let it remain in the online sphere, by all means, but Singapore society should be protected from, you know, these kinds of content. So that we did that. But to answer John's question more completely, There is also the kind of content that relates to online falsehoods, which Denise alluded to when she talked about POFMA. In those instances, for example, if there is a false statement of fact and there is a public interest to it, then instead of removing that content, what we do under POFMA is issue a correction direction.
Ooh, the
original content is there. Yes, issue.
Yes. Issue.
The original content is there, but there is a notification that says, look, this statement is being challenged. And so you didn't decide for yourself.
Correct.
So we take a calibrated approach. It's not the same blunderbuss, the same thing you apply to all kinds of content. You've got to decide that this content is a false statement of fact. And therefore, what you want people to do is decide for themselves whether they want to believe it or not.
Right.
So you issue a direction. A notice has to be labeled to be put up. Then you get to decide. You can see the original. You can also see the correction.
Actually, recently I see this on Twitter. So below the tweet they'll put the background
fact check.
info.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting.
Correct.
Something
But
that
it's
implemented.
the original content is still there.
Yes.
But there are certain kinds of content that we think probably not so good to even stay on. So the one with the Bible and the Quran.
Wait, it doesn't fall under statement of
So
fact,
different
like,
kinds of different laws to deal with different kinds of content rather than one
Blanket,
So if this creator that did, for example, I didn't see that TikTok, right? But so for example, if the Bible and the Quran one is done by some guy in Colombia, so what this law allows us to do is to get the platform to remove this for Singapore
Yes,
audience.
because you try to find a guy in Colombia, may not be even a real person.
I mean, it's not our
to
jurisdiction
begin
either,
with.
ma.
Yes. But the platform may also not be based here.
Right.
But our law says that, as long as your content reaches users in Singapore, then the law applies to you.
Are we allowed to do that as a country?
It reaches the users in Singapore. We go to Parliament. Parliament passes a bill that puts it into law. Then it's lawful.
If the app don't want to comply, then does it come to an ultimatum of like, you just have to remove your app from Singapore then?
You may have to.
Right.
You may have to be, you may have to take that next step.
Right.
But the way we choose to work on these things is that you really need the service providers to work with you.
Right.
Because they are seeing a lot more content. They have a lot more data. They are in a position to do analytics. And if you can work with them, if you make the law clear what their obligations are. So when we passed Online Criminal Harms Act, apart from being able to issue directions to disable access to certain content or to do account restriction, we also did another set of requirements. We will be able to put into effect codes of practice. And one particular code of practice that we are definitely moving ahead with is in relation to scams and malicious, cyber activities. So to put it in plain language, if you operate a social media platform which can potentially be misused by scammers and malicious cyber actors, then what we want you to do is please put in place some systems and processes.
Yeah.
So for example, if you're doing e-commerce,
Right.
if you're doing e-commerce, maybe the code will list out a few of the things that you need to do. For example, verify your users. For example, whoever uses...
So it's proactive instead of just only reactive.
It's proactive, it's not just reactive.
Okay,
The more legal way of saying it is that it's ex ante versus ex post. That means before it has happened and after it has happened.
Okay. Because I think recently, like the big news right now has been all like the hype concerts that are coming to Singapore, and with hype concerts come hype concert scams.
Got your tickets already?
Got my ticket. Got our ticket.
By the way, I can tell you that you must expect a lot of scams to do with these tickets.
People already
One
got
of
scammed
the
before the
concert-
general sale started.
Yes. And the scams can be both ways. A scammer can pretend that they have tickets when they don't have the tickets. A scammer doesn't even need to pretend to have tickets to sell.
Yeah.
They can pretend to be a buyer.
Oh.
Yeah, they can pretend to be a buyer and somehow make you, very kanchong into coughing up your credentials.
Right.
And lo and behold, you ended up giving
But
away
then
something.
how do we
should not.
separate like who are people that are genuinely trying to sell extra tickets versus like scammers versus all this? Because the OCHA Act, right, is supposed to kind of prevent the criminal activity
Yes.
before it can happen. But how do I know as in if a post we suspect to be a scam, then that post will be removed?
Well, unfortunately, there's no foolproof way. The code of practice that we hope to put in place for scams will then potentially require the e-commerce platform that the scammer may exploit for such purposes, right? You ever heard of how the payment doesn't actually go through until you have received the items in good order?
Like an escrow
That
account.
could, yes.
Yep.
It need not be an escrow account because there are other ways of securing payment, for confirmation of receipt of goods.
I think where people are concerned about is where do we draw the line? Because if we look at the Bible Quran example, maybe that person is trying to be funny, right? And sometimes, and we have local comedians, for example, and because we are such a racially diverse country, that our local comedians crack jokes at races all the time, but they get away with it because it's funny, right? So how do we figure out where that line is, especially when it can't be because it's funny, right?
Yeah.
It's more subjective than with POFMA, where it was a statement of fact.
Because it's a takedown, POFMA is not a takedown. It's rarely a takedown.
So I think what you have pointed out is just how tricky this whole area is. What is offensive to one person isn't offensive to another. What feels harmful to one community doesn't feel harmful to another community. And I wish there was a
Silver bullet.
yes, not just a silver bullet. I wish there were like, okay, here are the conditions A, B, C, D, E, tick box,
Right.
And if it's met, then we can go ahead. There is always going to be some judgment, and we will have to ask ourselves to what degree this involves the public interest and to what degree it makes people feel very uncomfortable. These things are not even static, right? Yeah. Stuff that feels offensive, 20 years ago may not feel so offensive now. So I wouldn't give the impression that we've got 100% clarity on how these laws can be invoked. It will always be a matter of judgment. But I think what we will need to do is to identify the examples where everyone are more like most people are likely to agree with.
And which body decides this or makes this judgment?
Usually, who is offended will most likely make the report. They may make a police report. They may report it to IMDA, which oversees codes of practice, and they might say that, look, this is egregious content. This doesn't meet with the requirements under the law. Then the team in IMDA will have to look at it, and then they will have to assess whether the provisions of the law have indeed been breached. And keep in mind that these decisions can be appealable,
Right.
meaning that the originator of the content can say, I dispute this.
Right.
What are possible grounds for dispute? As in, I'm just trying to crack a joke. Is that a possible grounds of dispute? Because to me, that is where the bigger thing comes in. Where I'm not allowed to try and be funny anymore. Because to try and be funny sometimes is to point out something that is true, that might be true, but not necessarily something that people want to articulate. Like the funniest comics are the ones that are speaking our deep thoughts that we don't dare to say out,
There is a point beyond which, it's not so funny.
No, I agree.
Anymore. So I think we've all seen examples of it where you will never get 100% agreement, but more people are likely to say that this is in poor taste or this is something that crosses the line. So with these kinds of content, we tread very carefully. Yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from. You don't want to have a sterile environment. And I will again say that this is a question of balance. This is not something that you take lightly. You don't act willy-nilly. In fact, the codes just came into practice. The codes, this is for online safety.
For this act, who is the arbiter?
For online criminal harms, it is what is known as designated officers.
Okay.
Because remember, Online Criminal Harms Act does not actually change existing laws to do with speech. It only deals with content that have got a criminal nexus. There's a criminal link to it. There is an underlying offense that is being carried out or is likely to be carried out.
Right.
So on the basis of the fact that there is an underlying offense, then what is happening online is in service of that crime. It
Yeah.
is helping that crime being carried out,
Yeah.
to be carried out.
Right.
And we don't want the online content to perpetuate the crime being carried out. So, sorry,
really
this is all
confusing,
pretty, there must be a crime to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put it this way.
Understand.
So would this also cover, like, say, some level of cyberbullying?
Cyberbullying actually is one of the things that we took care of by passing the online safety bill.
Is bullying a crime?
Very interesting, Denise.
Thank you.
With online safety, we were looking for harmful content that were not necessarily criminal in nature. With online criminal harms, we are dealing with an
Criminal
underlying criminal
Ah, okay.
offense
Right.
and online content that is making it possible for the crime to be carried out,
Okay.
if I can put it that way. With online safety, this will deal with content that are harmful to society, but they're not necessarily criminal in nature.
A few years ago, there was a high-profile nude leak by a prominent influencer in Singapore, right? And what she could do was very limited in that sense. Which, I mean, she called the police, right? And so they was investigated on who leaked, right? Who were the main distributors? And this thing started appearing on, like, the images started appearing on porn sites. It started appearing on forums and file sharing platforms, of which she will then be required to email them to request that they take down, but they don't actually have to reply her.
That's a really interesting
Yeah. Does this overcome
example.
that?
With online safety amendment, which we did last year, the social media services were obliged to set up a system to deal with user reports.
Right.
Then on a regular basis, we would audit whether this system was working well enough. But you're right. In her situation, in the case of this influencer, she was obviously hoping for more action than that.
Yeah.
With Online Criminal Harms Act, in the first place, was there an offence committed? If the investigation suggests yes, because there was a distribution of voyeuristic material, whether they were real images, real recordings, or they were made to look like her, that is in the first place a crime.
Right.
And so, not just the ability to deal with the crime per se, but to deal with the online dimension of that crime
Right.
is important. So if this turns out to have been a criminal act being carried out, then what Online Criminal Harms Act allows you to do is to issue a direction to the platform that is hosting this content and say, can you please put a stop to it?
Okay.
Okay.
So
Does that make it clearer?
Yeah, it's meant to complement existing laws.
Yes.
I think where it's a little bit surprising was that, and I think John alluded this earlier, is that we always thought that the government could have done that to platforms and say like, hey, look, you're breaking the law.
Yeah.
Take this down.
No, but I mean, to a certain extent, I feel like when it was on, if it's on like YouTube, or like the major ones, the mainstream ones, I
If
feel
you
like
had highlighted it to them,
there's headquarters here. Maybe the government can do something about it. But I feel like if it's on like, what's that file? Mega, is it?
Yeah,
Like if it's
Mega.nz.
being transmitted on Mega, then or like I feel like they might not have an office here. Then I
Right.
feel like, oh, there's nothing Singapore can do.
Right.
So you just have to email them and hope for the best.
To add on to John's scenario, what if, say, for example, they already issued the takedown and then there are other people who have downloaded the video, right? And then they go and re-upload. So then like officers or authorities continuing to track this and then issuing further takedowns, or is it up to people to report it and then the whole process repeat?
we'd have to look at the specifics of the case.
Right.
But in essence, what the bill tries to do is to say that you want to put a stop to the communications of such material.
For a while, we have lived with knowing that there are criminals on social media platforms. For example, people that text you and tell you, quick cash.
Yeah.
Or people that post like or boost Facebook posts about money lending and all that stuff, which you already know it's illegal.
Yeah.
But we have trained to just don't click. Whereas for new users or for older users, they are falling for it every 3 minutes. Like my dad. My dad clicked, like he was actively search for scams, right? And click into it. And so what this allows us to do is, instead of training people to simply ignore these things, we actually have enforcement power to be able to do something about it. Is that right?
Well, see, that's the thing. For the person, who's on the receiving end of a scam, or who is a victim of these kinds of exploitative material about them, it really feels terrible. It's not just a loss of money. Families can end up quarreling over this. They can have really big, fights over, why weren't you more careful? Now what's going to happen to my this plan and that plan? So the loss is really more than financial. And to a person who feels violated, I mean, you may never really recover from it. So we'd like to be able to help such individuals. We'd like to be able to protect them, from
So
coming
yes,
into contact.
the answer to that is yes. Is that what it is?
Except that you must also understand the police powers are also not unfettered, meaning that there are bounds within they can act and there are bounds beyond which they cannot. So it has to be the criminal offences that are spelt out in the Online Criminal Harms Act.
Right.
It cannot be the offences that are not yet covered.
Which then means that you must allow for a lot of amendments, am I right?
In time to come. Again, it's this idea that you cannot be blunderbussed about it. Cover everything. You cannot.
It's too
Precisely
heavy-handed.
because then, that's too wide. Society will have to assess, this is how far the law goes now. Is it enough? And if we agree that this is not enough, we want to be better protected, then we may have to go back to Parliament and say we take it a step further.
Right.
That's how our system works. We don't try to do everything at one go because we know that would be just too wide a remit.
And also because the times are changing so quickly
Yes,
as well. New
the technologies are changing. Now we got to deal with generative AI, right?
Is Singapore the only country that's like passing such laws? Because like, say for example, for TikTok, we've
Definitely
heard it
not.
getting banned like in multiple countries or so. Is it?
Oh my God, you're going to ban TikTok? I wouldn't mind, I'm okay.
Hey,
John, you suggested that. Let me make a clarification here. I said no such thing.
Yeah, but is Singapore the only one that is like passing such acts and laws?
No, but Germany, for example, has done something like that. So has Australia. But we've also learned from their experiences. I won't mention names, but we know some countries when they attempted to make the law too wide-ranging. The whole process of public consultation as well as debate becomes very difficult. It's even difficult for people to figure out what exactly are you trying to do with these different types of content. If you use the same tools for this class of content, it may be too weak, too soft.
Right.
If you use the same tools for another class of content, it will be too overbearing.
Right.
So if it's criminal content, we have the ability that for those that are already described within the Online Criminal Harms Act, we have the ability to issue directions for access to be blocked. Now, if you did that for other kinds of content, for example, a false statement of fact, then do you really want to apply the same tool? Or do you say that for those kinds of things, we just want to point out to you that this statement
Not
is being
true.
challenged?
Right.
You decide for yourself.
Right.
So some things you have to decide for yourself. Some things it's quite clear there is a victim already. We have to be able to act. Otherwise, we are not doing the other potential victims a service. You could have stopped it, but you didn't have the legal powers to stop it.
What is that main thing that's in your head? Like that main case that's either rampant or important enough that we are trying to overcome with this?
I would say that
key
right
thing.
now, what you described for your
My dad,
your dad, the victims of scams, and they're not just older persons. Younger people have been scammed too. How often it is that you heard of your friend, say that there was a pair of shoes that was really nice and it was going for a steal. And then later they realized the goods never got delivered. I got scammed. Right? That's pretty common. The other thing is would be the voyeuristic content that Denise talked about. It's very, very hurtful and harmful to the individuals concerned. It's just the amount of pain that they go through is indescribable, and we need to be able to act against those kinds of content. I would say these two big groups. Of course, the law does allow us to act. For example, there's a threat to public order. for example, somebody incites violence, say, let's all pick up arms and go and attack this group of people because we don't like what they say, or we don't like the way they look.
Right.
Now, those kinds of things and if the organization is being done online, would you like to be able to stop it? I think the answer is quite clearly.
So in the past, basically what will happen is that if someone does that, the police can go and find and catch that person. However, people will have already been riled up and might still continue with the plan. Right?
There
but
is
right
the
now,
online element
if
now.
it's spotted early, it could be taken down so that that person trying to rile people out to say let's attack such and such group, that can be taken down the moment it's spotted. Is it?
That allows us this gives us additional levers to act, not just the offense itself, the potential crime itself, but also what's carried out online.
Yeah, the recruitment in this case, the recruitment of violence lah.
Yes.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just also add, if the concern is about speech, Article 14 of the Constitution protects speech.
As in freedom of speech.
Yes, it protects freedom of speech.
Oh my
But
God,
there's
Singapore has a freedom of speech. I didn't
Article
know.
14 in the Constitution. But it is
Interesting.
also something that, common sense would tell us that it cannot be free for all.
Yeah.
Right? Freedom of speech doesn't mean totally free for all. You are free to go and harm other people. You're free to hurt other people.
Yeah.
It's circumscribed to some extent. And within those bounds, we have to ask ourselves, what would be acceptable. And so
Which will
with
always be
criminal
grey.
content, and which there will be also harmful content. Criminal content, I think, is not so
criminal
grey at
content's
all.
not grey.
The other types of content, some are also not very grey. For example, content promoting self-harm.
Yeah.
This is serious. Children have died, because they attempted stunts that were really very dangerous.
Yeah.
There could also be content that, for example, teach people, many different ways of ending your own life. Is that the kind of content that we want our children to be exposed to? There's also child sexual exploitation materials that are available online. Do we really want a society, that is constantly exposed to such content? You don't walk around, in physical Singapore feeling unsafe. But when you go online, I think the sense of danger is quite clearly higher. You have to be on greater alert than you are in the analog world.
So in before comments from, because like people love to say like own self check own self and stuff like that, right? I guess like in before those comments, because whenever people see like, oh, there's a law to let the government take down stuff and all, like I guess the elements of this that is slightly, I guess, protective against whatever people might say own self check own self is that there must be some criminal activity related to it in that sense, and that it's not so much opinions that are going up that are being taken down. Like it's things that have some level of criminal activity behind it.
Yes.
Okay.
For Online Criminal Harms Act, absolutely. And
Okay.
and to make it doubly clear, it's not even all kinds of crime.
Right.
It's crimes that clearly already in today's context have a online nexus.
Right.
There is an online element of it. So we are quite clear,
Right.
on what kinds of things we will be allowed, to act on. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for watching. If you are at the end of this episode, type down below. I have stayed till the end. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one. And of course, thank you, Minister Josephine Teo, for joining us.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for
Thank you, Daniel.
coming.
And thank you, of course, Denise.
Thank you, of course, I should say me.
Hey, of course,
Bye-bye.
Denise. Bye, of course, Denise. Meeting
Solid.
I
in
practiced
Tan
this
Xi Ling
last
for
week
lunch
also.
at 12:30.
Oh, okay. If you are late, I will help you explain it.
Okay, for real.
For real, of
Okay,
course.
okay.
Be my good friend. What?
Okay, fantastic.